Next, we'll talk about working with the full stack and being a full stack developer. Big word alert. A full stack developer. That basically means a developer who knows all the pieces of a particular software stack, and thus, if they really had to, could build an entire piece of software by themselves. So, for example, with the mean stack, a full stack developer would mean someone that knows MongoDB, knows Express.js, knows AngularJS, knows Node.js. Generally speaking, it's someone that knows the client, the server, and the database side of software, and perhaps as well design and UX. But either way, being a full stack developer means that you are a more useful developer to a software company. You're more marketable. So knowing both the client and the server and the database and other pieces of the front end is highly useful for you. Now, we're not going to talk in depth about every aspect of the stack, but we do want to talk about something that many people have trouble with when it comes to building applications with Node.js and JavaScript in the client on the browser. We'll start with the app that we used in order to look at AngularJS. So we'll have our app.js file with a simple Node.js server running using EJS and Express. In my views folder, I have my index file, and in my public folder, in a JS folder, I have my client-side app.js file and my Angular code. I'm already running it, and there it is. Now we're about to do something, and what we're about to do will be an example of something that you may not do a lot of in real life, but you might. But the point of what we're about to do is to be able to keep clear in our minds the difference between the code that's running on the server, which will be JavaScript code, and the code that's running on the client in the browser, which will also be JavaScript code. And this is a point of contention, I find, for those looking to become full-stack developers, to write JavaScript code on the server and the client and do everything, where understanding and being able to keep a clear mental model of what's happening ultimately on the server and what's happening ultimately on the client, that this is a real problem that can really trip up someone new to writing JavaScript on both sides. So we'll look at an example that will really test your ability, although the example itself is simple, to maintain in your head what's happening on the server and what's happening on the client. And if you can get this example, if you can get this clear in your mind, then you will take a big step forward in your track on becoming a full-stack developer with Node.js on the server. So I encourage you to try this for yourself, what we're about to do. Mess with it. Keep looking at it if you don't get it at first until you understand it. All right. The first thing we'll do is go and get rid of the hello text box and message. That will just be a distraction. So I'll get rid of the message in the controller, and I'll get rid of this text box and the message outputting in the body of the page. And so when I refresh, my people array is looped over, and AngularJS is using JavaScript code that will update the DOM. And so on the client in the browser, it does that update. Now here we go. I'm going to take this array that is sitting here, that is being used in the client, and I'm actually going to put it here in the Node.js app. So I'm just going to call this people, and we'll have the exact same array sitting here. There it is. Now this will be running on the server. Remember, with EJS and in general for any of the view engines, any of the template engines, I can pass an object with data that can then be used by Express in order to render the HTML. So I'm going to call this server people, and that is the name, and the value is this people array. So when Node.js runs this page and goes to render the index.ejs file, I'll have this object available to me. Now I'm going to go into my index.ejs file. Now remember, Node.js is not processing this JavaScript, the script tag that goes to Angular, or the script tag that goes to my app.js file. That's happening on the browser. But I am going to write another script tag which will be processed by the client, by the browser. And I'm going to take the data from the server and make it available to the client. And I'm going to do that by combining JavaScript on the client with JavaScript being run on the server. So I'll say var client people, just to name this differently, just to keep this straight in our heads. And then I'll put a piece of EJS code. And instead of an equals, I'm going to do just a dash. Now that's basically the same as equals, but when I say the equals in EJS, and different template engines have different versions of this, the equal sign basically means convert what I'm outputting to valid HTML. But I don't want to do this in this case. I'm not trying to output HTML. I'm trying to output some JavaScript, some strings. So I'm going to say json.stringify. Now, that's built into JavaScript, and that just means take the object and output it as JSON. So I'm going to say server people. So I have a script tag, I have some client-side JavaScript, but I'm putting a piece of server-side template code, which runs some server-side JavaScript. That's going to take my array and output it as JSON. And then this client-side code will end up as a new line of code as generated by EJS. And then I'll go now to my AngularJS file, and because that's just a global variable, let me go back for a moment. This variable is set up before I run my other script here, and it's just global. Then I can reference it inside my function, and I'll call this client people. All right, now here's the question. Will this still work? Refresh, and it does. So what just happened? Well, let's go back for a second and think about this again. When I loaded the page, then Express and Node.js responded to that by rendering the .ejs file using this data, and this was all server-side, Node.js side. When index.ejs was then rendered, what was the dynamic piece in here that was actually updated by EJS? Only this. And it took server people and converted that to JSON and replaced this area here with the result of json.stringify, in other words, a JSON string. And then returned that to the browser. That was the HTTP response. So if we go over to the browser and I just refresh this, go to the network tab, I'll click on localhost to see what we got back. And what we got back is, look at this. See this script tag? There it is. var client people equals. That wasn't adjusted by EJS or processed because that's just part of the page. But the part that I did tell the template engine to process, it did. It ran that json.stringify on the server. And so I ended up with some JSON that was directly placed inside the JavaScript code that was then run on the client, on this browser. And so client people, this variable, ended up with this data inside of it. And then my normal AngularJS code ran. Now let's think about this. I outputted data directly from the server onto the client via the template engine. Now, there are some circumstances where you would might want to do this. And we'll talk about those in just a moment, but does this make sense? Is this clear what was happening on the server and what was happening on the client and how the two managed to interact? This client people variable was never touched by Node.js. It was never run through the JavaScript engine on the server. Only this was, the JSON.stringify statement, which we specified to be run through the template engine. And then the results of that was given to the browser, and then the browser ran the result of that processing as its own JavaScript code inside its JavaScript engine. Now, I really want you to stop and think about this. Try to understand it. Wrap your head around it. Try it out for yourself. Mess around. Do some other things. And make sure that this is clear to you. Because, again, if you can understand this, if this makes sense and is clear in your mind, then you'll have a step forward ahead of many other people who are starting to or even have for a while used Node.js and get confused when going back and forth between the browser JavaScript code and the server JavaScript code. The two can be used together, but not really running JavaScript simultaneously. But with a little bit of trickery, you can use them together in this way. And if you can understand this, which is a bit of an interesting and in some ways advanced trick, then you'll have a better time keeping clear in your head the more normal kind of instances where you're running JavaScript on the client and JavaScript on the server. Make sense? Again, try this for yourself.